Welcome to the Founder's Journey podcast. This episode is about a great success story in an early stage pharma business. This is an interview with Artie Suckow, the co-founder of DTX Pharma, and one of his original investors, Jeff Friedman, principal at Friedman Bioventure. I hope you enjoy. Artie and Jeff, welcome to the Founder's Journey podcast. Glad to have you today. We're gonna be diving into your background and your story, Artie, on your journey with DTX Pharma. But before we do that, I'd like to get a good introduction to both of you. So we'll start with Jeff. Jeff, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
I would, and to start off by thanking you, Guy, for bringing this story, which I think is really quite interesting to a larger audience. So I'm an investor in the context of DTX. My background is as a physician scientist. So I'm trained as a pediatrician and a hematologist oncologist, picked up a PhD along the way, ran a basic science lab for about a decade. And prior to meeting Artie, had done a career 180 where I went from being a bench scientist to starting to work with early stage companies.
That's interesting. I want to talk about that a little bit more, but before we do that, Artie, okay. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Guy. My background is PhD in pharmacology from UCSD, industry career, Johnson & Johnson, Regulus Therapeutics and AstraZeneca, and then I guess scientist turned CEO, founded DTX Pharma in, I think it was 2017.
That's great. So both of you had a similar story in that you started in science and in research and went through that process. I think if I remember right, Jeff, you got your degrees at Stanford, right?
That's correct.
So both of you are in this research world very heavily, both heading down that path. Why ditch that? Not ditch it, but why move away from that and get into business? What was the call to want to do that? Artie, I'll ask you first because clearly it feels like you probably had that entrepreneur spirit early on. I mean, was this always the intent?
Yeah. So one, I would just clarify that I don't know that I've ever ditched my scientist hat. I still consider myself, first and foremost a scientist. And I think, the people who work with me would probably say that as well. I think with respect to, the journey to entrepreneur, I think, one of the, when I was in undergrad, I wanted to be a doctor. I took all the courses, graduated, first or second in my class. When I thought about being a doctor, Jeff can cover his ears. I was like, it's kind of boring. You just memorize a whole bunch of facts and then you kind of spew them back to patients. And there's like a 95% chance you have this. And there are some specialties where it's not as boring like that, but, start to get into research and realize that, I felt like, at least for me, I could have a bigger impact by developing drugs, right? You could have an impact on tens of thousands of patients, probably more patients than you could see in your life. So I think that was, probably one of the bigger inspirations. And then, with respect to entrepreneurship, in my first sort of dabble into that was in graduate school, where you had to come up with, it was called a minor proposition. And it had to be an idea outside of your own research. So, wrote it up, you wrote it in like an NIH grant style. I don't remember if it was 5 pages or 10 pages, whatever it was. My idea was in Alzheimer's disease. Well, after the committee meeting had seen it, one of the chairs of my committee came to me and said, we have some investors that really want to see this idea move forward. And long story short, ended up with my own lab, separate from UCSD while in grad school, but endorsed by UCSD. But I, even though the science was successful, I didn't I didn't think I could run a company or start a company or begin a company because I just didn't have enough experience. So with respect to each of my stops in industry, there was a reason why I went to, J&J, or in my head, a reason why I went to J&J, a reason why I went to AstraZeneca. I was the second person to join a group that went up to 65. So I learned how to build some things out. And then Regulus, it's a small biotech. My whole idea going there was that I'd get exposure to a small biotech that was functioning well. I'd spent 5 or 6 years there. And, it was a period of transition for Regulus, and they were on a pretty steep downhill trajectory. And, there weren't, very good people around the table like I had at J&J and AstraZeneca to learn from, that I could apply to, a journey like DTX. So hopefully that gives some color.
Yeah, there's more than one person, I think, that goes a similar path where they get into medicine and then they decide to get into research and then they end up working in a lab facility. I guess the dream would be to have your own lab and then potentially work for a company like J&J. I haven't met too many people that have made the jump that you did, though. So that's rather unique. I think there's a lot of people that are scared to do that. They're fearful because I'm a great scientist, but I'm not necessarily a great entrepreneur or a great business executive. Seems like you might have had some help along the way to get into that entrepreneur role. But how did you feel about that? Was it scary to take that type of jump, or was this just something you wanted to do the whole time?
I mean, I don't know that I was ever scared per se. I think one of the things that helped me, and investors and other people should probably cover their ears, is I never really thought that far down the road, because if I did, I would have realized how insane what I was doing was. I mean, I literally thought, and I mean, you could see from the way DTX was formed, I only thought, what do I need to do the next day to make sure that I was around for 2 days or 3 days or 4 days? And so I don't think I was scared. I think the other thing that I had, everywhere I went, was people who were really supportive of me, believed in me, and were resources for me. And I think that's also, as we evolve today over the DTX story, I can just, tell you, even with this new fund TCA group, I found people that were better than me at stuff, had more experience to me, and I leaned on them for advice and support. And so I think when I go back, I think what I had around me was a really supportive network of, no one told me, no, you can't do this. They all said, go for it. We believe in you. If anyone could do it, it's you. And so, yeah, I don't think that. And then I don't know where I got it from, but whether it's my parents or what, but I don't usually take no for an answer. So entrepreneurship was really for me, because all I hear was no, right? Every conversation, no, we don't want to invest in you. No, we don't want to do a partnership with you. And so I think that was also motivating.
Yeah, that's interesting. So one of the themes that keeps coming up on this podcast is the idea that angel investment adds significant value to people like yourself that don't understand certain things or need to learn from a community that's willing to give. So Jeff, that cues up your desire to leave the lab environment and start to get into early stage investment. Why did you do that? What was the motivation for you?
So I think there's definitely some parallels with Artie. So I would start off and say, at my core, I am a scientist. You can't spend that much time practicing a craft and learning the academics. And that's the foundation with which I've entered into the investment realm. I really am, my one skill is scientific and technical diligence. So I really do look at the core idea that an entrepreneur is trying to, develop or bring to life. And for me, I need to know that there's what I would call scientific plausibility to the idea. Otherwise, I just won't pursue it. So, are they working on a problem that's well delineated? It's something that's in need of solution, and therefore, does it have economic potential? And is their approach, as I understand science and it overlaps fields that I'm familiar with, is there some chance that they can actually, create value with the concept? So that's and let's just say every deal that I look at, that's important. In terms of my own career trajectory, I have both an MD and a PhD. I was slated to be a pediatric hematologist oncologist, and I just that's high stakes medicine. So as boring as medicine might be, that's an area where it's where it's really important. Big wins, big losses, and as I was on the precipice of let's say having an academic career with a lab and taking care of patients, I just decided that I should really do one of these things and not both, because I didn't feel I could do both well. And so I was lucky enough to get some grants when I was in my fellowship training. That led to opening an academic lab that actually brought me from Boston to San Diego, where I used those grants to open up a lab at Scripps. And I did that for a decade. Then I faced another decision point, which was it didn't look like I was going to get tenure at Scripps. I had a young family here in San Diego. My wife, who's also a physician, had a good position. I had academic jobs elsewhere. I didn't want to leave San Diego, which is probably a story that happens over and over again. A lot of people come to San Diego. Not many people leave voluntarily. And so I needed to find something else to do. And so, I was lucky I had that scientific and technical diligence, background to build on. And, I came to the Angel Group not looking for funding, but looking for colleagues who had complementary expertise. So sort of the same story as Artie mentioned, there were people in the group who had experience and knowledge that I did not. My ability to do scientific and technical diligence was complementary. And so that's sort of how I integrated myself into the Angel Group. And, one thing that I did do was, within, a year or so of joining the group, I took over the life science screening responsibilities. And so that gave me a lot of opportunity to look at, applications or companies that were seeking funding, got better at evaluating companies, and also got to work with other members of the Angel Group to understand kind of what their criteria were when they looked at early stage companies.
It feels like it's a rare thing, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is unique to San Diego, but maybe there's other communities that are similar. But the idea that an early stage company that is obviously doing something pretty technical in the genetics or other medicine area comes to an Angel Group and then finds somebody like you that is actually knowledgeable about what they're trying to do and understands what they're doing. Do you think that's a unique thing about San Diego as a community, to have people like you that are a part of the Angel community? Or do you find that as specialties around the country that focus on different niches or whatnot?
It's a good question. I think that obviously there are hubs around the country where I think the most common model is, IP from a research university, which is, continually spinning off ideas, creates an ecosystem around it of people who are looking for ideas and have some experience in, bringing them through development to commercial potential. So we're, yes, San Diego has UCSD, it has Scripps, those, and let's say, Sanford Burnham, and that creates an environment. Artie was coming out of prior pharmaceutical company experience, so he wasn't coming directly from academia, but that environment was here. So I think, but obviously it's, the Bay Area, Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, the Boston area, maybe to a lesser extent, New York and San Diego are really where these things happen most often. And companies who farm elsewhere, might still find themselves migrating to one of these areas just because there are better resources. I did want to say one more thing about, within the Angel Group that, New Fund at that time called TCA, is large. So you have a big membership, diverse backgrounds, and a fair amount of potential to support early stage investments so that you can pull capital from them. But one thing that I think was important in this particular instance, the problem that Artie was trying to solve was pretty esoteric. And so I felt that somebody like myself who had a scientific background was acting as an interpreter for many members of the angel group who weren't, conversant in that language. And so they needed somebody who they believed had domain expertise to say, yeah, this is really a good idea. You could make some money doing this. And so anyway, so I spoke the language and I served as an interpreter for many members, although there were plenty who did understand it.
That's another reoccurring theme. It's the idea that finding an early stage investor that has domain knowledge is very valuable to an early stage entrepreneur. So Artie, now I'd like to get into the beginning of DTX. So maybe you can walk us through the inception of the idea and then the motivation to create a company around it. And then I want to get into how you found your first investment or how you got your first backing, because that would be important for people that are considering doing this themselves.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd like to think that, the idea, it wasn't just one idea. So, when I realized that I needed to leave Regulus, I left Regulus and I just, I bought a new computer and I locked myself in my room for a week. And I just wrote down my 10 best ideas. I made a slide deck and I evolved all of them to varying degrees.
Interesting.
And I think when I started the company, or not when I started the company, but when I started to sit down, I don't think RNA medicines was high on my list of ideas. My background was in antibody conjugation, peptide conjugation, and in this metabolic disease space that's, really hot right now, right? You hear about GLP-1s and, what I was doing at my previous stops was all sorts of combinations of these different peptides. And so amongst, the 10 different ideas, there was a high prevalence of peptide combinations and ways to combine them. But what, kept when I would just go and talk to people and vet the different ideas. And the one that kept sort of, piquing people's interest and we kept sort of I kept working on, but also, approached, my co-founders, John and Adam, about was this idea that you could use fatty acids to overcome this RNA therapeutics delivery challenge, right? At the time, I don't even know if we knew it at the time, but we knew we could get them to the liver. And we were just on the verge of GalNAc, this sugar that you could attach to these molecules to get them to go into the liver safely and, have some activity. We're either on the verge of approval or on the verge of, the proof of concept that ultimately led to their approval. So that was kind of the backdrop. And I think what was interesting about the RNA approach was my background, facilitated credibly telling the story, right? So I worked on fatty acid receptors at Johnson & Johnson. So, I learned a lot about the way fatty acids interacted with receptors to get into cells. And so that's a huge problem in RNA medicines, right? The molecules don't get into cells and then they don't get into the right place within cells. And then at AstraZeneca, we used to use fatty acids on peptides to prevent them from going to the liver or the kidney, and just to keep them in the blood long enough. And that's the whole thing about semaglutide, which you hear about all the time. There's a fatty acid on there, binds to a protein in the blood that steers it away from the kidney. And, I learned, I guess, enough about RNA therapeutics in 10 months to become dangerous at it. And so, thought after, maybe not unlike what Jeff was describing, doing additional diligence in the space, making sure there was, ideas that could be novel that would enable RNA therapeutics and allow us to move forward as a company. So that, I don't know. I know it's not that satisfying that I didn't work on something for 20 years. I just sort of,
But this idea
whiteboard.
that idea of writing down your 10 best potential candidates is really fascinating to me. That exercise you did, locking yourself in the room and, okay, I got to come up with my 10. Did you come up with an evaluation criteria on which of the 10 were the most interesting or had the most potential?
No, I don't know. There was no formal, I wouldn't say there was a formal evaluation process. I don't know. I kind of laugh sometimes because a lot of people really want to have scoring systems and they really
Yeah.
want things to rise to the top. And almost every week, I'm in a process that involves this kind of scoring thing. And I think, I don't know, I think drug development, it's hard to, get it into a math problem. And then, the highest number, whatever it is, comes out on top. A lot more of it was, talking, it was instincts. It was talking to people in the space. It was like almost like a comedian working out their material, right? Like I would go and talk to, like, I specifically remember sitting in the Walid's, I forget his Danho's name. He's one of the most famous peptide chemists in industry on all these metabolic peptides. Everyone knows him. He just was in the Hall of Fame for a bunch of different peptide things before and after he passed away last year. But I remember sitting in his living room in La Jolla. He had just moved there and talking about all these peptide ideas. And he was like, everyone's doing this kind of boring. And then I was like, well, there's this other idea, putting fatty acids onto RNA, but I really don't know how to put multiple fatty acids onto an RNA. Can you tell me how to do that? And so, because I wasn't a chemist, and so he told me how to do it. But he's like, look, I'm like 80 something years old. I can't really help you. So you need to find someone else that's going to get this off the ground. So then I went and found Fabio at Epigen, and maybe the rest is history with respect to how to do that. But I think the long-winded point is that I don't know. I think I was really good at listening to feedback and then and incorporating that, and then I think ultimately you got to follow the data. So I don't know if Jeff knows this, but I was completely wrong. He probably knows this. I was completely wrong about what was going to work. I thought the way fatty acids interacted with receptors was a certain way. That was true. I made those molecules as a positive control or negative control. I made them in the opposite orientation in the first experiment, and the ones that were negative worked. And so I think I could have easily followed, dug in and been like, no, I'm right. No, we followed that, and then we learned how special it was over the coming months. So I don't know. I answered a lot of questions there.
Well, what you said, I think, is really powerful here. I mean, I have a theory, and I don't know if it's true, but I have a theory that success is inevitable if you have a persistent pursuit of a problem domain. So it's not that, and you just basically indicated that you did not have success in your initial interrogation, but you found success by a persistent interrogation and collaboration in your community, right? That's ultimately what happened. A lot of times we worry about, am I making the right decision? Am I going down the right path? And we're, like you said, we're trying to figure out the cost benefit analysis and trying to figure all that out. When in reality, just getting on the path is the answer. And I wonder how many people think like that, if that's just an entrepreneur way of thinking. But it's like, you just got to get on the path and just start trying, and you're eventually going to find success.
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, I definitely agree with you on that front. I mean, there's so many companies. I mean, I'm trying to be a champion of people that were like me, like that I feel like I connect with because they're at the beginning of the journey that I just made. And so many times I think people get paralyzed at the beginning and get too hung up on all the flaws with the approach. Like, I think if there's unmet need, that's really important. And it's not a solved problem. Like, for me, that sometimes can be enough. Not to diminish it down. There's a lot. It's way more complicated than that, especially telling the story and getting people to buy in. But I do think that some people get so drowned in these matrices that and they never come out because it's almost impossible to choose. I mean, everything has warts.
Jeff, is this a characteristic that you see in early stage founders or look for?
So, obviously, Artie's one of the hardest working people that I know. So I think you're asking persistence. And so, he worked incredibly hard. He was there earlier than anybody. He was there later than anybody. He was, as the company grew from Artie to 2 people to 3 people to, whatever it was, 40 or so, he continued to manage, many, many aspects of the business all the way through. And so, part of that probably is, difficulty of finding somebody who can do it better than he can and just having a tremendous capacity for doing work. So yes, for persistence, you heard, there were no's all the way along the way at every step, right? It's just, you want to be successful. You want to get funded. You got to talk to 100 people to find one. I've been thinking about a personality characteristic that hasn't come up yet that, I don't know what it means, but I want to just kind of describe. I was surprised. So, Artie has 2 co-founders, Adam Pavlicek and John Grundy, both of whom are also, pharmaceutical, big and small company veterans. And I've never worked in a pharmaceutical company, but what I found interesting was, none of them have particular respect for the big companies. In fact, I think all of them feel kind of disdain for the way that big companies run, how they waste resources. And so it sets up a dynamic where, you have these behemoths, which are, tens of billions to hundreds of billions of market cap, have resources that are, essentially unlimited. But, it turns out that, somebody with a good idea, and with an attitude can actually, end run them to a solution that they're trying to achieve at the same time. And so I found that fascinating. And I do think it's an important characteristic of Artie and probably of his co-founders as well, which is, it's like, these guys, these elephants are, chasing the wrong thing. They're going in the wrong direction. We're going to go over here and we're going to solve this problem. And he did. And so I just found that fascinating. And it's something that, having not been in pharma, I wouldn't have appreciated. I don't know if it's that the emperor has no clothes or what it is, but I'm just kind of curious if Artie wants to comment on that, because I found it fascinating.
Yeah, I don't know how to say it nicely, but I think if you are in pharma, I don't know, you understand how hard it is to emerge there. And I don't think they look, I don't know, biases or what, but when they develop things, they don't really look at the whole picture in these early stages. Like, they don't follow the data or pay attention to the data. And the people that do get drowned out. So if you're the one saying, hey, we shouldn't waste money on that because it doesn't work, say, on X receptor, or its PK isn't good enough, it doesn't matter. The train already left the station. And I've just seen that. I've seen that happen in even the year since I left DTX with small companies that are overly resourced. They put the milestone. It's all about milestones. It doesn't matter. And reaching the milestone, it doesn't matter what the data is. They just check the milestone. And then they're probably gone from the company before, that they would ever be held accountable to that. So I don't know. I can say it's inefficient. Obviously I don't have a whole lot of respect for a lot of the senior decision makers that I worked with. That's not true for maybe as I've grown and gained more perspective, or maybe pharma has evolved. There's actually a number of companies where I've grown to respect, some of the decision makers. Particularly, obviously, we're pretty happy with Novartis, Jeff and I, but I don't think the deal gets done if we don't trust and respect them. So, I don't know. I tend to agree I just don't think pharma is set up nimble enough, for a DTX to happen within it. Like, I don't think you could go to the new project committee and convince them to play around with this for a year and provide money or capital or resources. And there's probably no amount of experiments that you could do on a shoestring that would, sway them, because they're already, they're rigid.
Yeah, this is, we started talking about RNA research, and now we're talking about big organization and dynamics. But, I think it's that is not true of just pharma. I've heard this theme multiple times across many different industries, and I've experienced it myself. I have a theory that humans can only optimally perform in a tribe of a certain size. And once you get to that tribe that's too large, it just starts to run into organizational dynamics that lead towards complexity, and complexity slows the whole machine down. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be anything. But once that organization gets to a certain size, it's like complexity is the rule of the day. So it's interesting that you have that same experience in pharma, because it's certainly been true in my background as well.
Well, and maybe I'll just add that even I think you could see it at DTX to some degree. Now, I always joke, and I think our investors would back this up, that even when we were 50, we could still run laps around most companies in terms of how much we get done and how quickly we make decisions. I don't think. Just look at the output that we had, but it was harder. It was slower. It took more time when we were 10 people than it did when it was just Jill and Jeff and I, right? We would just go do it. Like, it wasn't like, delegate the task or answer 100 questions, whatever it is. Like, as we got to 25, it was harder. It was slower. And I don't necessarily know. Maybe it was more complex, right? There was more cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. So I don't know. Just validating that, I found that same challenge as DTX grew, even though I was in charge.
It's interesting. I think this is a productivity paradox in large companies, because certainly they would be very interested in having such a successful discovery that you had that led to the success of DTX. They would have loved to have incubated that within their own walls, but they're unable to do so because of organizational dynamics. So I think this is a challenge. This is a large challenge, especially when we live in an environment where mergers and acquisitions are happening every day. So everybody's getting bigger. So how do we keep that spirit that you're talking about and maintain discovery and new inventions and all that sort of thing? It's complex, to say the least.
Yeah, and I think maybe can I just add one quick thing on pharma? I do, as frustrated as it was to kind of grow up in pharma from a create a new product or have a new idea and have the resources to push it forward. I think pharma was still a very important part of our journey, almost for the reasons we're knocking. Like Andrew Adams at Eli Lilly. Jeff was there, but, Andrew Adams joined Jeff very early on in the DTX journey before we had an indication. So, there are people and maybe even organizations that kind of see the light in terms of, how to fund some of these, challenges that they have, right? That they want to incubate. So, I don't know, just a shout out to pharma, because they were part of our journey.
They definitely do that, but they always do that outside of their organization, right?
Yeah,
they
agree. Yeah. I agree.
So I was just going to say quickly, Andrew was the head of RNA medicines internally within Lilly, and one of the inflection points for DTX, I think, in terms of let's say external validation, was, in our fundraising path when we did a Series A, we were lucky enough to have Lilly be engaged and to join the Series A, and that just it made a lot of external eyes look at DTX and say, hey, what's going on there? Which was tremendously important, and I think probably relatively low risk for the pharma, to put a toe in, and it while it doesn't matter for a company as large as Lilly, they got a great financial return in the end for their investment. and DTX got guidance, got resources, and this sort of external validation that was really important, especially at that time, I'd say.
So Artie, so let's on that subject, because I think we're hitting on the reason why early stage angel investment, people like Jeff, are so valuable to this ecosystem, because getting started is so difficult. The lift off of the runway is not simple. So let's get to the point where, Artie, so you have your co-founders. I think it was Adam and John, I think we said. So you have your co-founders. You need money to get going. So talk to me about your early attempts to go raise funds. Where did you start? How did that process begin for you?
Yeah, so I think in our case where it was just, I don't know, I wouldn't say it was half baked, but it wasn't an evolved idea. It was just an idea, right? You really need to go to people who sort of blindly believe in you. And so, I think the early money, John and Adam each put in, like, I'm blanking, it was either 10 or $20,000 dollars. And then, both had, more extensive networks, than me, at least of people who had, money that they were willing to invest in biotech, which is obviously highly risky. And so I think, two things sort of happened. We got, a tiny bit of money between John and Adam and a couple of their friends. And we didn't wait to deploy that capital. Like I was very adamant that we needed to, even if it was just growing cells or transfecting cells, demonstrating to people that we were going to do this and we were going to check boxes as we go. And so we did that. Like we fortunately, J Labs was a thing. We got a single bench at J Labs, bought, I went, got flasks, got cells, grew the cells, did the transfection, found the tool molecule we were going to use to validate, the fatty acids, or combinations of fatty acids. I think coincident with that, the other thing that I did was I was a scientist, and as Jeff can probably validate, early on, I knew how to talk to Lilly. I knew how to talk to J&J, but I had no clue how to talk to anyone else, right? That's what I grew up in. And so, I joined, which, I think before we jumped on, you were talking about Springboard Connect. And so they assigned a group of 5 or 6 individuals that were to mention me. I actually didn't even get into the program initially. They put me on like probation or whatnot. And I worked with one advisor to put some slides together. Eventually I graduated from that and I was allowed into the real deal. But those folks who largely volunteer their time to help companies, they're usually in between jobs looking for the next opportunity is common. But there was one, James Calloway, who was just kind of semi-retired. And he sort of adopted me, not unlike the way Jeff adopted me in a different way, and helped, work through the slides and the plan and the vision. And I think that allowed us to get, at least momentum in that we could actually credibly, tell the story. I think the other thing that happened at that time was Adam introduced me to Jeff. And I think Jeff was probably, he can tell you for himself since he's here, but, I think he was suspicious. It was just an idea. But I think what was awesome about Jeff was, I think you did initially put some money in, but he agreed, to come to the team meetings and just watch us go, and then provide advice, and ultimately that evolved into him becoming, an active member of the team as the COO. And so I don't know. I sort of just talked to anyone and everyone who would listen. I knew that no one was going to write a check the day I met them, and that I had to tell them what I was going to do, go in the lab and do it, and then go back to them and, hopefully convince them that, this is a good idea, convince them that this was a good idea, and that the train was leaving the station, did they want to join? And I think, maybe the most fortunate thing, because DTX doesn't get off the ground without Jeff, is that Jeff was around the table. He had a big network. And he was sitting in the room every week. So when we did make progress, when we did need team members, he could help us get resources through, his network. And, we went to TCA at least twice to my recollection. And also, there was other networks of TCA. So I don't know, boiling it down, it was, tell people what you're going to do, go and do it, beg your friends and family to give you a little bit of money to prove that you're actually going to do it. I think a lot of people stop at, I've got this idea. They go and pitch it. People sort of roll their eyes at them. Like, there's so many people come to me like that, and then I never see them again and they never start a company. So I don't know. It's a little bit of rambling, but that's really the truth of how it came to be. Leaning on my network was a big part of it.
I think you've hit on a really important topic that I think is valuable, and that in the angel community, there are unsung heroes that actually dedicate and spend a lot of time uncompensated to help early stage folks like yourself. And I don't know if it's entirely greed that motivates that. It feels like it's motivated by, I'd like to make some money on a potential company, but it's also, I'm just really passionate about helping in this space, and it's fun, honestly. I mean, that's really what it's for me. I like to get involved because it's fun. I don't know, Jeff. So you got involved. You heard Artie's story. What motivated you to get involved, to start attending meetings, give that first check? What was really, what hit you the hardest?
So Guy, I'll amplify on what you said. It is fun, and I think there's a degree of freedom, as an angel investor. I mean, you're beholden only to yourself. Like you're not running a fund, right? You don't have fiduciary responsibility, and so you get to sort of pick and choose problems that appeal to you. That could be because you like the problem that's being solved. You like the founder, whatever it is. And in this particular instance, I had a warm introduction from Artie's co-founder, Adam. We had worked together on a philanthropic project previously. I was a board member of a foundation, and Adam had generously donated some time and resources to researchers associated with that foundation. So, I was certainly favorably inclined. I knew absolutely nothing about the problem that Artie was trying to solve. Again, he was serious, had a well formulated approach, was sort of honest about where he was, and was sharing data. And so I'll just say, when I came on the scene, I think the company had already raised $350,000 from insiders and friends and family, and we as Artie said, experiments had started, and we went to the angel group. The angel group said, it's too early now, and so okay, I think we raised a little money. But we went back to the angel group, I don't know, 4 or 6 months later. And there was additional data at that time that said, okay, here was the idea we presented to you guys 6 months ago. Here's data suggesting that this might actually work. And that was enough to catalyze, at that time it was a convertible note financing. And I think we raised, I don't know, 1.8 million, 2 million, something like that. Which was really, gasoline in the tank for trying a lot of ideas. And, I think, yes, I sat in on the meetings. I felt like I had something of value to contribute. And I just kept getting, more deeply engaged. As the company kind of moved up the, let's say the value chain for financing, as an investor, I was in an ideal situation or seat to understand the personnel of the company, the technology of the company, and the potential opportunities. And so, that allowed me to have a high degree of confidence for, putting in my own capital as well as bringing in other people, and telling them, look, I think there's really something here. I think there's yes, it's early stage biotech. Yes, risk is through the roof, but there's real potential here in this team and technology.
I hear a lot of early stage founders always really curious about the motivations of people like yourself. They always ask questions like, why would somebody risk their money like this? Why would they do this? I mean, this is crazy. I barely even have an idea, and I don't even know if it's going to work. Why would somebody do this? I'd be interested in what your response to that question would be.
I think investments or what you do with your finances, it's a very broad and diverse marketplace. You can spend it on consumption. You can spend it on vices. You can spend it on, philanthropy, or you can spend it on something where, where you're supporting something that may ultimately bring an economic return. So, truly an investment. And, in my particular case, yes, I wanted to make money. Yes, I wanted to put my skills to work. But there really were problems that I wanted to solve. And, from a medical or disease perspective. So I've always, I've been very interested in neurodegenerative disease, very interested in oncology. Turns out that, we were never able to find an application for DTX's technology in oncology, but we did see many potential applications, potentially game changing, in approach to neurodegenerative diseases. And so I had mentioned that I had spent time in a foundation. That foundation was focused on a rare neurodegenerative disease. It was of interest to me because my father passed away from it. And so, I, correctly or incorrectly, saw DTX's technology as, a potential, avenue for approaching these neurodegenerative diseases. And I think that's still the case. The technology continues to have potential in those areas. And so that was, personally meaningful to me, and had the advantage of also, if successful, bringing a good financial return.
So Artie, a lot of times, so you got past the initial phases, you found some people that were listening to you, even giving you some early stage money. At some point, you got to the point where you're given a pretty significant pitch in front of a larger group of people to try to raise more money so you can keep this thing going. Walk us through just what that was like for you. Was that intimidating? Was it scary? Was it just part of the process? Just walk us through that part of the challenge to get more money.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it wasn't scary or intimidated in part because some of this was being done in COVID and we were on Zoom calls when we were going out for the, Series B, right? The $100 million round. The Series A, I don't think it was ever scary or intimidating in that, like, Lilly was my people, right? That was the scary one, right? It was Lilly. And so I think that one, I mean, I don't think I was scared. I think though it exposed, I think early on we were exposed, and I learned a lot from it. I think, to get that next level, so we were a platform company, right? Almost in search of a problem, right? That a killer application is what I usually call it. And early on, and I think we had to do this, like almost anything that was like on the first half of that list we kind of talked about that scored, we would write a grant for and explore whether our technology could work for it. So, Jeff and I wrote a number of grants in the tauopathy space, a number of grants in the ophthalmology space. And then ultimately we came across the indication that kind of was the, quote unquote killer app. I mean, there could have been many killer apps, and it sort of depended on the audience. But the challenge that we faced when we got to that next level of investment is you need to have the killer app, and what's the value? Where's the value going to come from? What's the disease? What's the drug? And so I think, we pitched an ophthalmology indication, and there were lots of challenges with the target and the indication in terms of, checking a lot of the boxes that people care about, right? The big investors, they say that they have a long view in mind, but really when they get to the clinic, they want to know what's going on as quickly as possible, right? You want some target engagement marker. They want to know that you're going to be able to recruit patients fast. There's not a whole lot of competition, right? You're differentiated. And so, at the beginning, I don't think when we went out to raise that money, we didn't know what our killer application was. We knew it was going to come from a bucket of indications, that we'd get there. But sometime, and so I think a lot of the challenge was working out the order of the story and, what was resonating. And so I realized that, somewhere in the middle, and it really is like a comedian working out the material, that Charcot-Marie-Tooth, the disease that we went after, one of the diseases we went after, was really piquing people's interest, right? And so we literally all we did was change the order of the story to put Charcot-Marie-Tooth first and then retinitis pigmentosa, because we found out that when we talked about retinitis pigmentosa, everyone was sleeping by the time we got to Charcot-Marie-Tooth, and sometimes they woke up. But so change the focus, that brought its own challenges, right? Because no one knew what Charcot-Marie-Tooth was. Most people thought it was almost like a lifestyle disease. It wasn't real. There wasn't a whole lot of, no one really, there was a couple clinical trials, but nothing that resonated with people. So, I think that was hard, because now you had to pivot to the killer applications and then deal with those warts. And I always joke with people, I'm like, you think you start an RNA medicines company, there's all these genetic diseases, it'd be really easy to find something that would resonate with people, but it's not. I mean, it was hard. Hard because the clinical path, hard because there's 100 other companies working on it. So that was probably the biggest problem. And I think getting over the hurdle was, fortunately, RA Capital had Charcot-Marie-Tooth on, one of their lists of, if we could find anything that works in this would be huge. Good marriage. We had a couple other term sheets. I was maybe Jeff didn't know it at the time. I was suspicious of the other term sheets, not because of their valuations or the amount of capital, but more because I was worried we weren't philosophically aligned in terms of what direction to take the company. And so I came out pretty strong. I'm sure Jeff and I argued a little bit. We were good at arguing with each other and then forgetting it the next day. I knew that this was the investor that could get us over the finish line with CM and support us in our vision for the next 24 months. So, the challenge was finding the killer app and being able to tell the story in a way that, people could see how you could extract value from it.
So once you start to hit on something like you did there, clearly the neuropathy thing and all of that's a growing, expanding area of research right now. But you hit on something big and you hit on a specific application that was working for you. But then you start getting a lot of interest from investors because of that. And now you start struggling with control of the company and what the future control is going to look like. Sounds like you overcame that, got through that. Any advice you would give to somebody that's starting out in your shoes about that giving up control issue that so many founders run into?
Yeah, man, I don't know. I go back and there's so many things that could have gone wrong, but I come back to philosophical alignment. And maybe being authentic and transparent about what you really have. I think Jeff instilled that in me pretty early on, or maybe reinforced it because I was always pretty transparent and authentic, but would reinforce it. Even the way I talked about different indications and some of the data, there were times where he's like, I wouldn't go that far. And I'd be like, why? That's what the data said. And he'd be like, just be careful. And I'd be like, I know I'd sort of roll my eyes in the moment, but then when I reflected on it later. So I think philosophical alignment going into the next round is absolutely critical. And then, I don't know, I more recently learned this. I think it's really important when you build out your board to have people who've been there and done that. And what I mean by that is built a company, done deals, raised money. I was in a situation very recently where, the board was a board of investors, and I was just banging my head against the wall. Like, have they ever done this before? Do they have any, So I think you need a voice of, you have voice of reasons. And, fortunately, Jeff was very supportive of me bringing on, champions, like people like that, right? We had Tim Scott on the board. I wouldn't say he's hardcore biotech, but he was a rational human who had clearly good business sense, good chops. And when I couldn't communicate to the board something that it clearly needed, he would help, people see why we needed that or whatnot. So I don't know. Philosophical alignment though is absolutely critical. Otherwise you'll be fighting the whole time.
Sounds like it's a bit of a mixture between getting philosophical alignment, but also surrounding yourself with people that know more than you do in a particular area, so that it can aid you in your process. Sounds like that's a bit of a balance. Sounds like you navigated that well. Jeff,
yeah, that was critical.
Jeff, this idea of transparency comes up a lot. So there feels like a little bit of a challenge between being very open and transparent, but also trying to sell people to get money from them. So maybe you can comment on that. Because obviously every investor wants them to be transparent, but there's also the salesmanship about getting people to write checks too.
Yeah. So I don't know that there's really much of a conflict. And I think I very much come down on the, sort of full disclosure side of things. As an investor, I want to know everything. I get quite upset if I feel there's material information that's withheld when I'm making an investment decision. If I'm inside a company, I don't want anybody on the outside who's evaluating it to be in that situation. So, there's full disclosure. How you pitch and the potential of the technology. I mean, this was a technology that had and still has, hundreds of potential disease applications, that we never had enough resources to explore all the possible, places where it could be deployed successfully. So I don't think there was a problem selling the technology as a tremendous opportunity. So I didn't feel the conflict there between, being honest about what you have and touting the potential. One other thing I want to say about, sort of board and, discussion, internal discussions, a really important thing for DTX, early on and later is it's like, all the people who were involved were pretty darn reasonable humans. Artie's co-founders, John and Adam, really understanding, incredibly reasonable at every step along the way. We want to do what's best for the company. Our strategy in fundraising early on, and really throughout was it's like, look, we're a biotech company. We're trying to develop drugs. We need unlimited resources. We can't do anything without resources. We can't build the technology. And so we were never, we never had pitch battles about the valuation of what we had. It's like, look, we'd rather finance it and create value than argue about what our pre-money is. And I think that's a trap that a lot of founders and, management teams fall into that make it harder to get resources. Unfortunately, if you're in biotech, you just need money and you have to be reasonable going out there and raising it.
Great. Well, we're getting to wrap up time. So, Artie, I'll start with you and then we'll go to Jeff. But Artie, I'd like you to talk a little bit about the success. Clearly, you sold the company to a great company, Novartis. And I'd like you to comment on that if you can. And then more importantly, I'm really targeting this podcast at people that are interested in following your footsteps. So if you have any advice or guidance, the last minute parting words you'd like to say, I'd love to hear it. And then maybe just give us a quick, what's next for you, or what are you working on today?
Yeah. So, I mean, on Novartis, obviously a very successful outcome. I think there, and I think this is really important in pharma, probably in both of our experiences, why that gets done is because there's a champion at the organization. So that's really critical. And I think also, I don't know how Jeff saw it. I think maybe probably similar to me, like DTX was our baby. And so giving it up, to someone, we were really going to have to trust that they were going to be good stewards of the technology. But we made a lot of promises to CMT1A patients, raise money from neuro foundations and such. And so it was a high bar, a reasonably high bar, where at least for me personally, I had to believe that they were going to take this into patients for CMT1A in a way that we couldn't, and be patient. And it was going to be tricky. The clinic was going to be tricky for this indication. And so I think, that we got that in Novartis. They've kept the entire part of the team that it makes sense, all the research folks. So I feel good that, I think everyone got to an exciting, or hadn't retained an opportunity to continue to stay with the technology, which was important to a lot of us. I would say, I don't know, there was a lot of places where, there could have been different outcomes with DTX, right? In January of that year, we were like, well, if anyone will give us money, we would take it and sign up now. And then, all that changed almost overnight. And I think maybe the 3 or 4 words that come to mind about DTX are, I think be resilient, right? You're going to hear a lot of no's, but learn from those no's, right? Why are people saying no? If there's something common, well, you either have to go do an experiment to fix it or go on offense about that topic, so that, you just got to be on offense, right? So resilient, a lot of people are going to say no, learn from the no's. It's really hard to raise money. I think be adaptable. There's so many times where we were adaptable. But I think the most important one is following the data. Follow the data. I've seen so many. I can give you 5 examples from my own career at other places where people didn't follow the data. The data told them it wasn't going to work. And of course it didn't work for the reason that they knew 3 or 4 years prior. Be transparent. I think that's really important. Be authentic. Share what you know. And relationships, right? This is a relationship game. DTX doesn't get off the ground if not for relationships I developed with John and Adam, if not for, Jeff and I, a relationship, if not for the relationships from the mentors that came along the way, some of which were from New Fund, James Mackay is a good example of someone from New Fund. So I don't know, resilience, relationships, adaptability, transparency. I don't know. And my new favorite one is be ethical, or do the ethical thing. So, and we did that a lot at DTX. So I'll leave it with that. And as for what I'm doing next, had a hard summer on a consulting gig. I'm sort of taking a break for a couple months, mentoring, like I said, mentoring companies that are in the same boat that I was in 6 or 7 years ago, where I think I can have an impact. Or allow them to not make as many mistakes as I did. I mean, we didn't talk about that, but I made a lot of mistakes along the way and tried my best to learn from them.
Great, Jeff. You want to talk about the success, and then what advice you would give to people that are in Artie's shoes?
So I think it's really important to think about. Some things that went right. I mean, if you have a success, you want to try to take lessons and apply them to other opportunities or companies in a portfolio. It's not always easy to do that, but I want to shout out some things that Artie did, which I think were incredibly valuable, and that is from first of all, the company was incredibly careful about resources. So, there was a tremendous amount of value creation, compared to the amount of capital that went in. And I think that was at every stage of the company. J Labs is a good case in point. You can rent a little space, you can build it up incrementally. There's not a lot of capital expenditure. He started off with a part-time technician. When we had money, we hired her full time. But Artie had a vision from early on about how he wanted to build the company when he had the resources. And he reached out to people who he knew from prior work experience, who he respected, who had specific domain expertise. And he told them, hey, I've got this startup. When I've got the resources, I'd like you to, consider coming and joining us. And I don't know, for maybe the first 8 or 10 employees, I think that's how Artie built the company. He got the people that he wanted. He kept them warm beforehand. We went out and raised the resources. So there was really, foresight that I don't think is obvious from the outside in building that core team. And that core team was, again, incredibly efficient at generating the kind of data the company needed, which was, running cellular assays to identify potential lead molecules, to explore the technology, and shortly thereafter to test those in vivo in animal models. And the speed with which the company was able to do that, sort of the cycles of technology development, I've never seen it before. I don't know if I'll ever see it again. It was very efficient and remarkable. So that's, if you could think about what you want a startup in this area to do, have it have control over its technology, its development cycle, to sort of be able to build up the IP and know-how around its core technology. With regards to sort of the financial aspects of the successful exit, the decision-making process there was, I think in the end, relatively straightforward. We were looking at doing, 2 clinical trials, not necessarily simultaneously, but we looked at our capital requirements. That was something like, 200 to 250 million over the next couple of years. And we had an offer on the table that gave the company a certain valuation. And we just looked ahead and thought, we're going to take tremendous dilution to push the company forward into, sort of clinical proof of concept. And we could fail. There's a lot of risk in going into the clinic. And we just, everybody looked at it and said, this is the time to unload the technology to a player who has, the resources to carry it forward, and guarantee a nice economic return for existing investors and team members. So it was pretty straightforward, at least as I remember the decision-making process.
What's next for you, Jeff? What are you up to?
So I continue to do a lot of work with early stage companies. We lead a few financing rounds. I've got companies in oncology, diagnostics, and basically trying to deploy capital. Get in early in a company. I'd love to recapitulate this model. I don't know if I ever will, but get insight into a company, where my knowledge base can be useful, help them out, help them with raising capital, and just, again, be in a position where if I believe that there's significant value being created, that we can make a substantial investment both for financial return and to advance technologies that we see as promising.
Well, let's hope that somebody listens to this podcast and hooks up with you, and that's the next big thing. Artie, I suspect, and I get the sense that there's another couple of runs in your future, or at least I hope there is.
I would love to recapitulate Jeff's, what Jeff observed again. I'm confident that Jill and I are ready to do it again. So thanks, Guy.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Founder's Journey. You can follow us at foundersjourney.fm for updates on our episodes and to recommend future guests. Special thanks to our primary sponsor, Newfund Venture Group, who can be found at newfund.com.